Welcome to the Holy Post. Mike Erre joins me and Phil today to discuss how to survive the holidays. What's the best way to engage or disengage a contentious relative who wants to argue about politics? And how do we remain united as churches and families in these divided times? Then we lost another influential Christian leader recently when professor, author, and preacher Tony Campolo passed away. Shane Claiborne returns to discuss his friendship with Campolo and his legacy of challenging the American church with the red letters of the Bible. Also this week, what's the real goal behind protecting public nativity displays and disappointed political witches? I've got two more announcements before we get into the episode. First, we've wrapped up all of our Holy Post events for 2024, which were sponsored by the Litvin Divinity School at Wheaton College. We loved meeting so many Holy Posters all over the country, and if you couldn't make it to one of those events, I've got some good news. A recording of the Houston event that Caitlin did with Beth Moore is now available to subscribers on HOLYPOST Plus. And that leads to the second announcement. For Black Friday, we're doing our best sale of the year. Starting now and ending on Saturday, new HOLYPOST Plus subscriptions are 50% off. If you've been waiting for a good reason to sign up or to get a gift subscription for someone else, I think 50% off is a pretty good reason. So head over to holypost.com to learn more. All right, here is episode 645.
Hey there, welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. I'm Phil Vischer. I am here with Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hi, Phil.
And the pastor with the mostest. The
holy of the postest?
The holiest of the mostest. Mike Erre's here. Hi, Mike.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to just tell you something right now. For those of you who have never had a chance to participate in the hosting of the show, the posting of the show,
most of our audience has been on at one time or another, I think.
Well, for those of you that haven't, the dynamic between Skye and Phil is a lot like the dynamic between Mike Tyson and Jake Paul.
Oh.
Phil is an older guy standing there taking punches while Skye does a lot of bobbing and weaving and moving around. And that's, I feel like walking into that right now is sort of the what is it? The ring lady that holds up the sign.
Yeah, that's
what
you.
I feel like today.
I wish you were dressed like that.
That's
come
definitely
on now.
you.
I can take care of that. If we weren't
come
YouTubing,
on.
I'd go shirtless right now.
Oh boy. Okay. I gotta put this to an end right now. It's time for the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post.
And sometimes Caitlin.
This episode is sponsored by the Wheaton College Graduate School. Hey, are you a pastor or ministry leader? Would you like to continue your education without stepping away from your current ministry role? You need to know about the new Doctor of Ministry degree program at Wheaton College. You'll interact with world-class Wheaton faculty, some of whom you've gotten to know right here on the Holy Post podcast, as well as students from a broad range of theological traditions and perspectives to help expand your cultural intelligence and lead well in a contemporary, globalized world. With the flexible hybrid format, most of your learning will be online with 1 week a semester at the Wheaton campus, allowing you to learn and serve at the same time. There's a special concentration starting this summer with Dr. John Dixon, Communicating Christ in Skeptical Times, exploring the challenges and opportunities of Christian leadership and ministry in our increasingly secular world. Go to wheaton.edu/communicatingchrist to learn more about the Doctor of Ministry program at the Wheaton College Grad School. That's wheaton.edu/communicatingchrist. The Holy Post is sponsored by BioLogos and the Language of God podcast. We all come into contact with hard questions that don't have simple answers. We want to bring both science and Christian faith into engagement with these hard questions, not necessarily to find simple answers, but to grow through the process of exploration. That's what BioLogos and the Language of God podcast are all about. Language of God is a podcast about science and faith from BioLogos that dives deep into complex issues through interviews interviews, and storytelling. The podcast explores questions like, what does it mean to be human? How should we respond to the climate crisis? How are we changed by technology? Featuring the voices of experts and thinkers, scientists and theologians, and several HOLYPOST guests like Jonathan Haidt, Esau McCauley, Curtis Chang, N.T. Wright, John Walton, and even me. Check out the Language of God podcast on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, Skye, you've got a hat. What's the hat this week?
I have a hat. This was given to me by a listener when I was in Banff, and it says Pulpit Plumbing.
Yeah.
Which I thought was some kind of ministry reference, but apparently not. He actually has a plumbing company, and I think he explained that there's a large rock somewhere near Calgary known as Pulpit Rock, so that's why it's Pulpit Plumbing. But I thought, I'm a preacher, and it's a messy job, and sometimes there's
someone's got to do it.
That's right. So I thought it was kind of I like the hat, and it's very comfortable.
When you're
actually
preaching, stuff happens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think that's...
Don't have the fans on, ladies and gentlemen. Don't.
And sometimes there's a clog, like it just, my brain does not connect to the mouth. And that's what happens.
I hear you. I bet as Caitlin listens to this in a few days, she's going to be so glad she wasn't here. So glad she missed all of that. Okay, we have to dive into some very hard-hitting news. Mike said, we don't have any news this week. I said, I'm sick of the news.
Nothing happened. Nothing happened today.
I'm sick. I got to tell you, I'm sick of the news, but we still have to hit the most important stories. Witches report their spells against Donald Trump aren't working.
Oh.
Okay. Follow me, Mike. I didn't send this to you ahead of time, so you didn't have a chance to do your usual biblical study.
Yeah.
And come up with your verses and make a 30-page outline for your response. In the lead up to the presidential election, witches were trying to cast spells against Donald Trump, but they were reportedly frustrated that their spells weren't working. The Toronto Star reported on one example in which a group of roughly 100 witches had been gathering by Zoom. Maybe that's the problem.
Is that a broom? Is that a broom reference?
Yeah. They're on flying Zooms to attack Trump in the spirit realm. An ABC News outlet in Alabama reported about witches writing on the Reddit forum that their spells weren't working, with one of them saying she believes it's because too many people are praying for Trump. Therefore, this is a quote, therefore he has a shield, a flimsy one, of course, but a shield nonetheless. I'm trying to figure out a way to create spells that can bypass that, but it's difficult. Another witch posted, I hate to say this, but don't do magic against him. He has a form of protection surrounding him that feeds off of magic done against him. Another said on another forum, other witches have mentioned that doing spells directly against Trump is not as effective as we might hope, as he seems to have some kind of protection around him. This was reported, by the way, by the Christian Broadcast Network. So there is just a little bit of excitement that all of the prayers for Trump might actually be winning in the spirit world.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, Scott?
Did they actually name any of the people they quoted?
No.
Okay.
No. Why? You want to follow up with them?
No, I just want to take it with a grain of salt because it seems more like good Christian propaganda than it does actual journalism.
It was from Reddit forums, Skye. You don't think there are Reddit forums for witches and Instagram forums for witches and TikTok forums for witches?
I think it sounds like those angels from Africa are actually working. Remember, who was that?
Bro, that was where I was going. Paula White. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Paula White, yeah.
So what's your advice for the witches? Oh, can we just admit, this is like the 10th, maybe more, group of people that have been frustrated by, why don't our attacks against Trump have any effect? Why? He's so many things would have ended any other candidacy of any other politician in U.S. history. He has a special form of protection around him. How can we not conclude that it's the Holy Spirit? Mike, how?
It's hard not to draw that conclusion, Phil. So The thing that I love too is how many of the Christian prophecies about Trump winning in 2020 were just mistimed. They were correct, but they got the year wrong. So
it was a mathematical error, not a error of prophecy.
Exactly right. So maybe a similar thing is at play here. Maybe they're attacking the 2020 Trump and not the 2024 Trump. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How many elections, like presidential elections in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, do you think had witches trying to curse them in large groups? Is this like something new we're growing? Like we're growing. I know that witchcraft and the occult has been growing on social media, incredibly. But is this just what does this say about us?
Well, you didn't need witches in those days. If you just played Stairway to Heaven backwards, it would do the work for you. So
that's
Mike,
true. All you had to say was he's a communist, and then poof, they were gone. They poofed away. Skye.
Mike, do you remember the open forums we used to do in college?
Oh, yes, Skye, absolutely.
So I encountered some witches there.
You did?
Did you?
Oh yeah, on Western campus. Yeah.
How'd that
go?
That's
that's where
Western
they would be.
Campus. Yeah, that's where.
Wow. If you know Miami University, and then everyone who does going, oh yeah, Western campus witches, they're legendary.
What was that like?
I'm serious. It was
what
really.
Was that like?
I don't think it was something I would joke about, honestly.
Yeah.
It was serious. Like it was pretty wild.
Okay.
But
so I have been
job, Phil.
rebuked. I have been
No.
rebuked
I still think the story is probably crap. I think it's probably garbage.
Joking.
Because the message of
I think we can substantiate, I think we can verify that curses put on Trump to lose the election did not work, right?
Yes, but I think the idea that those curses were coming from actual witches and that he has actual spiritual protection around him fits a narrative that people, was it CBN, whatever that
CBN
network, CBN, that validates a worldview and perspective that their audience wants to hear. That's all I'm saying.
But okay.
Fair.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fair point.
Sure.
I mean, that's a fair point.
Sure. Okay. Well,
Skye's
how about
up
this?
2-0 right now on the scorecard of the boxing match.
Okay. So, witches against Trump, you're just going to have to try harder because he's got a shield. He has a magical shield. It may be his hair products. I'm not sure what it is, but you can't get through to the man. Christmas is coming up. We're in that season. Mike Erre has already put up his Christmas tree. Have you?
Oh, 2 of them. Yes.
2 of them.
I was listening.
Yes.
I was listening to Christmas music today, as a matter of fact, to prepare for
Really?
our time together. Yeah, in honor of Skye.
Is your Advent calendar opening a new Christmas tree each day and putting it up in your house?
No, my friend. But here's our thought, and I've said this before: when the world goes dark, we light up. And so on the weekend of daylight, whatever, savings time, we throw lights on the house. In the house. And that's a metaphor for Jesus. So
it's a metaphor for
Mike,
Jesus. Pulpit
lighting
plumber.
up means something else to other communities. You know that.
Western Campus might be an example of that as well.
Yes, that is.
In the spirit of Christmas, a conservative Christian law firm has announced the launch of its annual campaign aimed at protecting Christmas displays on both public and private property. The Liberty Council announced Monday that it has launched the 22nd annual Friend or Foe Christmas campaign to help spread awareness of the rights people have to openly celebrate the birth of Jesus. The annual campaign launched in 2003 in response to, quote, continuing lawsuits and demand letters and threats from organizations regarding nativity scenes, religious symbols, even red and green that students might wear in public schools. We wanted to push back, says the founder of the campaign. We called it the Friend or Foe Christmas campaign. We wanted to find out who's the friend and who's the foe of Christmas.
Sounds like baby Jesus, man. Totally.
I can't believe they missed an opportunity to call it the Naughty or Nice campaign.
Wait.
Oh.
Wait.
Oh, Skye's on fire.
They later expanded the campaign, responding to alleged censorship of Christian displays in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, and then from there dealing with private sector censorship via their naughty and nice list.
There it is.
Oh.
But I thought we won. Guys, I thought we won.
He actually says the naughty list has been getting shorter over recent years.
Oh, good. That's great.
So
we're winning.
Yeah. So, for example, if a retailer just started saying holiday lights or holiday wreath or holiday tree and not mentioning Christmas, they went on the naughty list that was publicized so they could be shamed, because that's what Jesus commanded us.
That's what the birth of Christ is about. Absolutely.
Okay,
Friend or foe?
We have talked about this many times over the years, but this is an opportune time to bring it up again. For most of American history, most Christians did not celebrate Christmas.
Oh,
And
that's
as late as
heresy.
the
let the facts
1880s and
get in the way of a good
1890s,
story.
Heresy.
there were many sermons talking about in
Hearsay.
Protestant churches again that Christmas is not a biblical holiday. And it was outlawed in Massachusetts by the Puritans, and many other Christians just banned Christmas.
You're making
So
stuff up.
I just think it's ironic that now people are angry when the culture doesn't engage in materialism in the name of Jesus. But decades ago, it used to be criticizing the culture for engaging in materialism in the name of Jesus.
All
I
we
just want
want
pretty lights.
is for stores to say Christmas at the end of the year while they're selling us stuff. That is what we want.
Is that
and
too much, Skye?
Will make Jesus great again.
But that's my question: is what does that accomplish? What does that accomplish?
It makes Jesus great again. It makes us feel like we're a Christian country when our stores say Merry Christmas.
That's it.
Yeah, but
I'm still part of the in-group.
Exactly. It's not about obeying Scripture. It's not about pleasing God. It's not about worship. It's not about transforming people's souls. It's not about.
The Bible says those are Christmas lights, not holiday lights. It's right in the Bible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere. I haven't really read the Bible well. I don't know. Is that in there, Mike?
Merry Christmas, absolutely. Luke chapter 27.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just gonna move on. So we got the witches being a little bit silly on one side. We got the Christians being a little bit silly on another side. Tony Campolo died. Did you hear about that, Mike? Did you ever meet him, Mike?
I'd never met him, but his preaching was something that really captured my imagination.
When? At what point in your life?
Well, Skye and I were both involved in Campus Crusade for Christ, and they're just super zeroed in on discipleship evangelism. I never, whether it was a deficiency in me or them or whatever, I never was captured.
You,
believe me,
probably.
I think there's plenty. I was never really captured by social justice. I just kind of inherited a view that said, hey, that's optional. We're just pulling souls off of a sinking ship. And Campolo was the first one that really challenged that. And his story about throwing a birthday party for a prostitute at 3 a.m., and that's what the kingdom is like, that opened up Jesus to me in some really, really cool ways. I went to Jesus's parables and went, okay, that's what they feel like. That you would be equal parts astounded and offended by that. And
he certainly wasn't the first one to preach social justice, but from inside evangelicalism, talking about social justice is him and Jim Wallace and a few others were very early on in that movement. Skye, surely you met him.
I did meet him.
Everyone.
I did meet him, and there was a season
don't call him Shirley.
I almost felt like I was a Tony Campolo groupie because he kept speaking at places where I happened to be, like there was a benefit in Chicago where
he was a
speaker.
Skye. Maybe he was a Skye Jitani groupie.
Yeah.
No. I wasn't on a platform. I was just attending these things. I wasn't doing anything there. He was at Okoboji one year. I think the first year I spoke, he was.
You spoke there, and I spoke there that year. And I had to follow Skye Jitani and Tony Campolo, who both remarkably could speak for an hour without notes and
What's it like to speak there? I've always wondered.
Okoboji,
You will
you'll
never have a
know.
chance, Mike.
Because if we invite people and they say, no way, then it's like, okay, it's like it's like you ripped up a picture of the Pope on Saturday Night Live. You're not going to get invited back. That's just how it goes.
All right, fair enough.
I will say this. I heard Campolo share that story about throwing the birthday party for the prostitute in Hawaii so many times, I could probably recite it. It's a great story. I mean, it's one of his,
it's a good story.
trademark stories, but yeah, I heard it a lot.
I told my story over and over again too. It's you got your go-to material. We
all do.
You just
Yeah.
you don't change material, change audiences. That's the key.
Yeah.
Phil.
That's exactly right. Play Freebird. Play Freebird. I don't want to hear the new stuff. That's what it is.
I agree, but there's few stories more memorable than throwing a birthday party for a prostitute at a diner, right? I'm sure that's all over YouTube.
There aren't that many stories that feel as gospel-y as that one did. Like that feels like that could have been a parable. You know what I mean?
Guys,
Like,
if someone's saying, I'd like to hear that story, where would I find it? Do you suppose you can find it on YouTube? Is it
It's got to be on YouTube.
Skye could do it.
That's right. I'll just come and perform it for you.
Not with
Tony.
the energy. Not with the energy.
No, there was no one like Campolo. I bet we can find it on YouTube and post a link in the show notes for people.
Okay.
It's got to be there.
We'll do that. Oh, wait. We have a producer chiming in and saying something. We'll put a link in the show notes. Oh, it's on YouTube. Mike
Great
says.
minds. Great minds.
The other Mike.
It is interesting, though, as some of like Tim Keller and some of the sort of Christian statesmen and women begin to pass on. There was a big debate on Twitter about who carries on Keller's legacy and what sort of legacy Keller has. And Dallas Willard was another one. It is interesting to see what is going to emerge out of the holes and the vacuums that are kind of left by these really influential people. So it's just an interesting, is it, do we go to more influential and different influential people, or do we sort of live on in the legacies and streams that they left in their wake?
I assume, I have a question, because I assume that Jim Wallace and Tony Campolo, when they started, hoped that they could redirect evangelicalism. And
the curses failed there too.
Yeah, and found instead that you can very easily get cast out of evangelicalism and then find yourself kind of on the outside looking in. And it's such a fine line of when, farewell Rob Bell. Look, sorry, you went too far and now you're gone. And do you think Campolo lost his connection to mainstream evangelicalism near the end? Because I just heard of him less and less. He was getting very old, but
I think in the last 20 years, mainstream, I'm using air quotes, mainstream evangelicalism, at least white evangelicalism, became increasingly politically conservative, and a voice like Tony Campolo's became increasingly seen as outside the fold, even though theologically I don't think he was. But he also was getting older and wasn't as visible in the last number of years. But Mike, the three people you mentioned are interesting, and they share something in common. Dallas Willard, Tim Keller, Tony Campolo. None of them were well-known or influential voices when they were young. They all really emerged on the scene later in life. I don't think Tim Keller published a book till he was in his 50s.
Oh, wow.
And Campolo, I think he was 89 or 90 when he passed away. And I remember bumping into his stuff first as a college student in the 90s. So really in the last 20, 30 years of his life is when he had a lot. And Dallas Willard, same thing. And it's interesting to compare their influence late in life after they had been seasoned and challenged and tested and quietly working behind the scenes versus what's happened in our generation and those even younger, where you had the Rob Bells and the Mark Driscolls and these hot, young, popular, published, platformed voices that seem to like flame out really quickly. I think the question of who's going to fill these slots is partly because we just don't have long enduring, patient, tested voices like prior generations did, because
Do you
we're so
think
quick
it's-
to platform
Do you
them, and then
think it? Yeah. Do you think
That's good, Skye.
it's
Really
it's
good.
still possible to cultivate? I mean, the industry isn't going to do it. You know, the Christian publishing industry and the event industry, the conference industry, they're probably not scouting for 60-year-olds that no one has heard of who've been faithful pastors for 40 years. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that. They're looking for podcasters that are racing up the charts. They're looking... Yeah. So how would you even find those guys anymore?
This is the definition of the evangelical industrial complex.
There it is.
Written about a lot. It's not interested in maturity, experience, or wisdom. It's interested in platform, popularity, and pyrotechnics. You know, so
Nice.
I think to answer your
that was
question,
3
Phil,
Ps. Did you do that on
It was.
purpose?
Bro, that was
that's
amazing. It
because
deserves a bell.
I'm a
Is that from
pulpit
your book?
plumber. That's
Come
Is
on
that
now.
from your book, Popularity, Platform, and Pyrotechnics?
Yes,
like it.
everything has
That's
to be
awesome.
alliterated in 3 points. To your point, Phil, I think it's not going to come through the industry. It's not going to come through publishing or conferences. It's going to come through relationship. And we could probably name people we know, men and women, who are in the later seasons of life that we think smell like Jesus and have that godly character that we want to emulate. But if you're looking for them on radio, podcasts, Christian publishing, all that, maybe some of them are there. But
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if somebody emerged late in life out of nowhere on those platforms.
Yeah.
The thing about Dallas in particular, he was not a great public speaker. He was hard to follow. He was dry. And it was his content that kind of came to the top before his personality did.
Yep.
Which is my hope. Not happening yet. So maybe I just need to be older. I don't know.
Okay. So this is coming out the week of Thanksgiving. We have to record it early because a couple of us are traveling next week, so we're recording early. But it's coming out the week of Thanksgiving, which makes me, want to wonder, what are we thankful for in this season? How can we? Because a lot of people in our audience are still reeling from the election, and and now I don't want to talk about the news just because what's going on with Russia and Ukraine is crazy. What's going on with Israel and the West Bank and Hezbollah and Hamas is crazy. What's going on with picks for the cabinet is crazy. Thankful Matt Gaetz withdrew, so there's a thanks. Thankfulness, but there's so much craziness. I'm trying to figure out how we encourage people to, this Thanksgiving. Skye?
What comes to mind is because you mentioned the passing of Tony Campolo. I'm grateful for the books that a lot of these people have left us. Their writings, not just the ones we mentioned, but going back through Christian history. I mean, there's so many rich, valuable, wise resources that we've inherited from the church and from, the faithful witnesses that have gone before us. Like, I'm grateful for their perspective and wisdom. I don't know. I feel like it's worth taking this holiday time to disconnect from the news and maybe reconnect to church history a little bit and read some dead people.
Yeah.
It's for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, my daughter
Dead turkeys,
and
dead
I were
people.
talking about the Crusades last night. Is that what you mean?
Maybe.
We were actually.
That's part of it.
The Crusades.
Sure.
It is part of it. Mike, what
Because
about you?
the theme was, there have always been movements within the church that have gone off the rails and done terrible things, and it's not, it's not new. There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do we read Ecclesiastes and just,
I don't know if that's the kind of encouraging pick-me-up some of us need right now.
What should we read?
It's a great book.
Skye, give us a Bible passage that would be good to read right now before Thanksgiving.
A Bible
A book,
passage that would be
a big
good.
chapter, not just I
Song
don't want a
of
verse.
Solomon.
I don't want anything that I could needle point on a pillow. It's got to be a chunk. It's got to be a chunk.
I would read John 14, 15, 16, and maybe 17, which is the farewell discourse, the final conversation Jesus has with his disciples the night of the Last Supper before he's arrested. And it's a lot about the Holy Spirit. It's a lot about abiding in him. It's a lot about a bigger vision of what the Christian life is supposed to be. I find it very comforting and inspiring, and it's a big chunk of scripture. And there is also a series on With God Daily that explores it, that people, if you're a subscriber.
Whoa.
I know.
Whoa.
Go in
What's
depth.
that?
Look at that. Look at
With
that.
God Daily, and where would I find that?
It is the daily devotional for people who hate daily devotionals, and you can get it at withgoddaily.com.
Oh,
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Ding.
But anyway,
that
find
deserves a bell, bro.
it does deserve a bell.
Yeah,
Bro.
I think along with the Sermon on the Mount, those are two chunks of the Gospels.
That was mine.
Yeah, go for it, Mike. Why the Sermon on the Mount?
Oh, bro, that's where I thought you were going, but I didn't realize you had the John farewell discourse worked out. For me, the character and person of Jesus as he lived in culturally contested space where the stakes were much higher than they are in America, where the Romans were torturing and oppressing and driving people into poverty and all the things that we know, and how Jesus chose to ignore the political options that were on the menu for the various tribes of his day, and instead, instituted a completely alternative way of being political, and outlined in the Sermon on the Mount the kind of people who will inherit the land and the kinds of behavioral responses that lead to those kinds of people. I find this whole season really invigorating, because I think we've talked about it before. The role of the church, doesn't change depending on the outcome of elections. How the form that the role of the church might take could change, but the role of the church, that's still, we're living into our identity as exiles and children of God. We're living into the margins as people advocating for those who are socially vulnerable and marginalized. And, we're trying to build counterculturally hospitable communities in a just drastically polarized world. So for me, there is much to grieve, but I have this odd energy towards, man, this is when all of that love your enemy and pray for those that persecute you and all of that stuff kind of matters most. So I don't know. I find myself thankful, and this is so dumb, guys. And I'm sorry to say it, but if you've been a listener of the times I've been on here saying dumb stuff, that's just par for the course. I am super thankful for the faith community I inhabit that has both people celebrating the outcome of the election and people mourning it. And there are people who are mad at me for not being more mournful, and there are people upset for not being more triumphant. And living in that nest of tension and ambiguity and sorrow and celebration, that pulls out some of the best stuff in me. To live at a table that has all of these opinions and hurts and joys and sorrows, and tries to somehow get us off of that spectrum onto the reality of the kingdom of God in Christ. And it's just, I don't know, it keeps me away from feeling defeated or feeling passive or feeling disempowered, because my thoughts immediately go to my local relationships. My thoughts aren't, hey, let's organize on social media or let's whatever. It's literally, okay, so I'm looking at supporters of the president-elect and people who are weeping because the president-elect is the president-elect, and trying to manage and hold all of that is just...
Okay, Mike.
Yes.
Mike, first of all, isn't it more comfortable to be around people that think just like you?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
that is absolutely why I am on this show. Because Phil and Skye and Caitlin especially tell me what I should be thinking about this, and I like it.
So but you find odd energy, and I think that's a pretty good way to describe Mike Erre. That's some odd energy. You find odd energy in this season, partly because you're in a community that doesn't see eye to eye on some issues that we consider
really matter,
important.
Yes.
So we got people that are about to have Thanksgiving dinner, and there may be some disagreement about really important issues within the family around that turkey.
Yeah.
How can you help? How could you advise based on your pastoring of a mixed community? How would you advise people who are about to go into a fraught Thanksgiving holiday?
Yes. Well, I find, and this is
and I gave you so much time to prepare for this because I told you about this 2 seconds ago.
I think we would all, we would all say similar things, right? That our reactions to what's happening in the world, tequila, lots of that, for sure. Or maybe just agreement that we're not going to have that conversation. But the biggest thing that challenges me is this is where the Sermon on the Mount comes in, because my reactions to what's happening in the world are like circumscribed by the way of living that Jesus not only embodied but teaches, in those texts. And so I don't have the option as somebody who wants to take Jesus very seriously, ring the bell, Skye.
That's not a product placement. It was not a product placement.
It was close. It was close.
It's close. It was in the realm. There's somebody who thought it.
TM.
No, what if Jesus was serious?
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
TM.
Okay.
There. See.
TM.
If we take Jesus seriously, then just writing off all the people that we disagree with, that's not a biblical option. There are times where that may have to happen for the sake of harm, or if somebody is a victim of something in your family. There are times that happens, but that's not the normal posture. Nor is the normal posture demonizing those people and writing off half the country as idiotic or dumb or whatever. The name calling, all of that. So we practice, right? We practice the hospitality that Jesus shows us at his table. We practice that at our table, which means we're curious. It means we're humble. It means we're not trying to play by the binary spectrum that's handed to us by American culture politically.
How long does someone have to be in your community before they're comfortable realizing that it's not like other communities?
We try to tell people that frequently. I mean, we had and we just, especially around this season, it's just been. Yeah, go ahead, Skye.
I got a question for you along those lines, though. Don't you think? I mean, people self-select into churches, right? We're not obligated to attend a church. It's not some kind of feudal land thing where you have to go to the parish closest to you.
But it should be.
It should be. People voluntarily opt into a church. So I'm assuming that the people who have voluntarily opted into your church, to some degree, want or are at least tolerant of the diversity that's in that congregation. And the people who really want a homogenous church, whatever that homogenous identity is, they're going to opt out and go to that homogenous church. So to a degree, haven't you kind of gotten sheep that want what you've got, so it's not as big a problem?
Well, that's super interesting. I think in some cases, yes, and I think in some cases, no. I think there's actually been a cracking open of folks over the long 4-year slog we've been going at this stuff that have allowed folks to be more open to living in those tensions than they maybe were initially. And so I think when an election season like this one happens, yes, it gets more crystallized and acute. But the conversations around, because we're serving communion every week, we practice, the central communal practice of our community is called the table, where we just get together and have dinner with people you don't know and talk. It's nothing fancy, but it's literally, we just say it's practicing hospitality. And so I do think over the course of time that spirit and word and community soak into people and open them up. And we have people who come who hate that we're not more X, Y, or Z. So they don't want this. It would be easier for them if they weren't there, but they've captured a vision in some way, shape, or form for the idea that the new humanity is only really on display when there is a diverse group of people sitting together in the name of Jesus with their differences subsumed under their identity as child of God.
I could dig into this deeper and deeper and deeper.
I know, I love you.
I think at some point I just need to come down and visit and cause trouble.
Oh,
do you
Skye.
think the fact that you have Q&A at the end of every service plays a role in this?
That's a huge formative part of it. Yes.
Yeah, because
you'll get questions from the various people with with different kind of perspectives or whatever, and when those are welcomed and we say, I mean, we talk a lot about being center set, and good Lord, guys, we are just a jacked up, crazy, with
odd energy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying we've got it figured out. I'm just saying there are a group of people who I'm proud of who are fighting to stay at the table with people they would otherwise write off. And I think that's really good fruit these days.
Yeah.
And so I'm proud of those people.
In a sense, if there is self-selection going on, it's people who want to be, who value nonconformity around the issues of the culture
and issues of theology. I mean, we've got when you're taking communion with somebody who is openly gay, and you're somebody who believes that openly gay people go to hell. There's a lot that's happening in that moment that's far beyond just the fact that we would disagree over a piece of theology. And so, to be sort of centered set for us means that we try to clarify the center, which is, of course, Jesus. And we try to do as little litmus testing as possible. And so politically, that's what we're full of these days.
Yeah.
How could you be a Christian and vote for whoever? Go, Skye. I love you.
Okay, so we've talked about your church and the dynamics there before, and it's really inspiring and grateful for it. Translate what you are trying to do at your church. No, not a but. But I want to honor our listeners here for a second. Translate what you're trying to do at your church to what we're all going to experience on Thanksgiving with families where not everybody around those tables may be a follower of Jesus. Yeah. There's a diversity of views and opinions and politics. Like, how do you do? It's one thing to do it in a church community where you have at least a shared authority that you can appeal to in scripture or Christian doctrine or whatever. What about in a place where that's not the case? What does it mean to be a Christian there?
Will you, and here's really the bottom line, Mike, will you attend people's Thanksgiving dinners to do Q&A at the end of the dinner?
On a Zoom call? Yes.
Yeah. Will you be like Santa and show up at every Thanksgiving around the world?
There are people, we're similarly sized, and I do have an outfit. I don't know if you remember, but I've got a uniform.
That's right.
There are people in my immediate family who voted differently than I. And I have very strong opinions about how I voted and why I voted the way that I did, and the voting the other way and what that means. I have friends who are victims of sexual assault who feel radically dehumanized by some of the choices being made around cabinet positions. I've got friends of different skin colors who are legitimately worried about what mass deportations look like. I have thoughts and feelings about all of this. But I mean, this is the dumbest answer, but I have to, because it's my family. I separate the ism from the person. Mm-hmm. And I want to be an outspoken critic of the ism, of attaching the name of Jesus to any ism. I automatically, it doesn't matter if it's left, right, whatever. If you attach Jesus to an ism, I'm against it, absolutely and vocally. But I somehow want to have a sense of curiosity and compassion for the people who've been formed by the isms that I would disagree with. Because I've been formed by isms, and I didn't start wanting a table that was diverse. I started thinking, well, yeah, if you're a Jesus follower, you're Republican by definition, right? You don't start there. But it was only because people tolerated me along the way that I began to open up to the possibility that, maybe this isn't the best and fullest expression of the kingdom.
Yeah.
And so I just want to extend that same grace. Now, again, there are times when there's harm and you got to get out of there for your own mental health and sanity, no doubt. And please do that. There's no Christian law that says you've got to eat Thanksgiving with your family. Although you do need to say Merry Christmas if it comes up. There is, though, all sorts of opportunity to not have to have the last word or to show myself right. And that's the part that's really hard for me. Skye, one of the reasons why Skye's one of my favorite humans is we're both very much book people, and we love having answers and thoughts and expressing those things. And what's really hard for me,
as opposed to Phil,
well, Phil,
who has an odd energy.
Phil, oh Lord, no, I would say that's more of an eerie energy, spelled differently.
No, go ahead.
But I'm just saying, the hardest discipline for me is to not have to be right, to let people be however they're going to be and choose consciously to value the relationship above that. Now, the pushback I get is, but this team coming in, they're harming people, and should the church call that out? And the answer is yes, they should call out whenever people are being harmed, no matter who is in power. And it looks different because one side is attaching the name of Jesus to their agenda, whereas the other one isn't as explicit about it.
Yeah.
But I agree. But I'm not sure that calling out when people are being harmed has to happen at the Thanksgiving table.
Correct.
Right?
Unless there's someone in your family.
Right.
Being harmed.
So what's your favorite go-to deflection? If around the table the conversation starts getting contentious, is it,
yes,
hey, who's seen that new show on Apple TV, or what do you go to
do we want to watch Hot Frosty tonight, guys? Because that's the new Netflix Christmas special. No,
what is that?
It's a very hot snowman comes to life as a very hot
Skye.
guy.
Come on.
Hot as in attractive.
Is the snowman made to look hot?
Yes.
Like with abs and stuff?
Yes.
Yeah, dude.
Yes.
Come on, man.
Because
Picture a
Hallmark.
snowman that is hot.
Yes.
End of story. That's the pitch.
Who built him? Who built it?
Women.
I don't know. I haven't watched it yet, but that's my go-to.
Because that's apparently what women want. They want a hot snowman. Mike?
Yeah, I'm more on the before. Okay, what?
Oh, hi. Here's what I think. I did something as a spiritual discipline 2 days ago. I did it 2 days ago as a spiritual discipline. I deleted Twitter from my phone.
What?
Yeah.
For those of you who know the sweet Phil, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Good for you.
And
I love
the
that.
reason I think of that is, to a certain extent, there's a million Thanksgiving dinners happening all the time on Twitter.
That's good.
With
That's
a
good.
million, crazy uncles, except you don't feel an attachment to any of them. And it is so hard. It is so much harder not to dehumanize and not to get angry and not to want to do the work. I mean, that's the bottom line. I shouldn't be on Twitter as much because there are people that want to come and just throw mashed potatoes in my face. And because they're not in my family.
You don't need that, Phil.
I don't have a connection. I'm not very motivated to say, yeah, but how are your kids? Tell me about your kids. Did he win that thing? How did he do with the contest at the school? And which is, to me, is the best deflection, is like talk about what we have in common. And it's that we love our kids and
humanize each other.
We're in the same family. So Thanksgiving dinner, not Twitter. Do not approach it like Twitter.
I love it.
Do not try to show people how wrong they are like you do on Twitter, Phil. It's just people that need to know that you love them.
Yeah.
Even if you disagree with them.
My therapist had a great line. She just said, this was during the 2020 election cycle. She just said, we're all little kids and we're all afraid. And this is what it looks like when we haven't been raised to believe that, that we're loved and we belong. And for some reason that helps when I'm sitting.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, man, the line from Walt Whitman, be curious, not judgmental. So my default is just to start asking questions. Well, how long have you felt this way? Why do you see it this way? So and so and Skye, go. I love you. I love you so much.
To that very wise comment from your therapist, I remember having this moment. I think I was maybe a college student or a grad student, and I found an old yearbook, my mom's old high school yearbook, and she went to a huge high school, little tiny pictures. And I flipped through it and I found her picture. And when I saw it, I suddenly realized my mom is still that teenager. It just clicked in my head. I think I was old enough to finally get this, that my parents at however they were in their 50s, I guess at the point, like they're still the people they were when they were teenagers. And then you look around the table at Thanksgiving, all these adults who have all their issues and opinions, and you go, we're all just still really dumb kids. And with our insecurities and proclivities and fears and stuff like that. So to that end, if you were going to have like a real brawl at Thanksgiving dinner and like it turned into a legitimate fight, what would be the best food to throw?
Mashed potatoes. Really? Because they stick.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fair.
Yeah, it's the sticky effect.
I'm going
and
turkey
gravy's
leg
too hot.
because it's got some heft to it.
And you got a handle. You can like get
You got a
leverage with
handle.
that.
It's got some heft,
Right.
and then if you've taken a couple bites, it might have some pokey.
Wait,
you can
are we
do a
saying
shake.
are we saying we want to hurt people?
No. But if we
If it's a
did.
brawl,
Yeah.
I mean, you painted the scenario. It's a brawl.
Yeah.
So,
Well, then just
yes.
throw plates.
Okay.
Throw the knives.
Yeah, I don't like this. I don't like this line of questioning. I cancel it. Okay, Mike, when you then we're going to wrap it up. And everyone's going to go to Thanksgiving, and it's going to be completely different because of what they've heard here and the advice we gave. And it's going
I used to be the token prayer. It's like, oh yeah, this guy's religious, so why don't you pray for us?
What was it that you did that made you no longer the token prayer?
That's a long story, Phil, and this is not confession. Okay. So
Okay. So, Mike, you did a 49-part series on the Sermon on the Mount, so you're intimately familiar with it. Maybe it wasn't 49, but it was quite a few. You're intimately familiar with it. What's one principle from the Sermon on the Mount that I should have in mind when I sit
Phil,
down?
easy. I got it
when
already.
I sit down at Thanksgiving.
I got it already.
Okay.
Phil.
Yeah.
And this one, I hate this one. It's one of my least favorite verses in the entire sermon. But if I am identifying the sin in another, I'm to regard my own judgments and my own sin as a plank, a 2x4 versus the speck of dust in another. So I have to sit in a room and think, I'm the biggest sinner in this room, right? Whatever nonsense is happening, whatever. Mm-hmm. I don't know anyone else's insides or motives the way that I know my own. And so I sit and it is an absolute slog to do this, but I sit there, and when I find myself judging, I will just simply say, I'm the biggest sinner in this room. And I mean that physically, because that's true, but I also mean that spiritually. So anyway, that's the line. That's the line for you, Phil.
Okay.
That's right.
Remove the turkey leg from your own eye so that
Yes!
you can
Oh, Skye! Bam!
remove the speck of stuffing from your brothers.
Oh,
Okay.
Skye,
there you go, everybody.
That's why it's pulpit and plumbing. That's
Pulpit plumbing. I know that some of you are disappointed that we didn't go over all of the appointments to the cabinet and rate them on the scale of Jesus' acceptability. And I just don't want to do that. I just am
Phil hates
sick
the news.
of the news. I didn't want to do the news. So instead,
We didn't.
Yeah.
The only cabinet I want to talk about is the one that the pies are sitting on.
That's what I'm talking
that's
about.
nice.
And speaking
My
of cabinets, I mean, when I'm looking at your wood paneling, Skye, like that reminds me of That's yep.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's got several either pies or cabinet members stuffed
Wait
in
till
there
you see
somewhere.
our new studio set that we're working on.
Oh,
Well, it's not.
all right. I'm in.
It's not
I'm in.
anything yet, but
I
it'll
love it.
get there. Okay, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Think of what you're thankful for. Practice what Pastor Erre is preaching and hopefully also practicing.
No, dude. I thought we knew that. No.
and have a great week. And we'll figure out what we're going to talk about next week when we all get back. Thanks a bunch. And don't forget to go to HOLYPOST Plus, HOLYPOST.com. I forget what the exact. Just go
With
to
God
HOLYPOST.com.
Daily.
With God Daily. Voxology podcast with Mike Erre.
Whoa.
And Seth. And
Yes.
Tim Stafford. Because are you still officially in your series on identity? And
Yeah.
Okay. Because
Yeah.
it's gotten a little.
It's a little unwieldy. I know.
A little unwieldy. Okay.
I know.
All right. Anyway, we love you all. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next week. This episode is sponsored by Glorify, the #1 Christian daily devotional app. If you're like me, you'd probably love to start your day in the Bible, but you're never sure where to start or what to read. You should try Glorify, the #1 Christian daily devotional app. Start your morning with a daily Bible passage, a short devotional, and then an immersive experience called Daily Walk with God. If you need a break in the middle of your day, try one of Glorify's guided meditations or listen to their curated playlist of worship songs. At the end of the day, try a sleep meditation to calm yourself down and forget all about what someone just said about you on Twitter. Am I projecting? Right now, Glorify is offering you a free 14-day trial when you visit glorifyapp.com/holypost. Right now to download the Glorify app. That's glorify-app.com/holypost to download the Glorify app for free. glorify-app.com/holypost. This episode is sponsored by Erre Digital Picture Frames. Sometimes shopping for the people we love the most can be the hardest. Our parents, our grandparents. What do they need? Probably nothing. They just love memories. But how do you give memories as a present? Simple, with an Erre Digital Picture Frame. Named the best digital photo frame by Wirecutter. Erre frames make it so easy to share unlimited pictures and videos directly from your phone to the frame. My parents are still with us, but they're not getting around as much as they used to. They love to see pics of my grandkids, their great-grandkids, and now I can update their picture frame as soon as I've taken a great photo of the little guys they love. For a limited time, visit ErreFrames.com and get $45 off Erre's best-selling Carver Mat frames by using promo code HOLYPOST at checkout. That's AURA frames.com, promo code HOLYPOST. This exclusive Black Friday Cyber Monday deal is their best of the year, so don't miss out. Terms and conditions apply.
Phil, Mike, and I have already discussed the passing of Tony Campolo, but I invited my friend Shane Claiborne back on the show because he was especially close to Campolo. As you'll hear in our conversation, he first met Campolo when he was a student at Eastern College, where Tony Campolo taught sociology for decades. And together, Shane and Campolo got into all kinds of good trouble, to use a John Lewis term. I wanted Shane to give us more insights into Tony Campolo's faith, his courage to stir things up and to challenge comfortable Christians, and how he was able to keep his pursuit of justice rooted to his communion with Jesus Christ. Here is my conversation with Shane Claiborne. Shane Claiborne, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Yes, my brother. Good to be with you always.
I always enjoy our conversations. You lost a friend recently. We lost a great voice in the church, Tony Campolo. You guys were really, really close. I thought you'd be the right person to have on to talk about Tony and his legacy. But to begin, when and how did you guys meet?
Well, the reason I came to Philly from East Tennessee was largely Tony Campolo. It was to study sociology with him at Eastern. And I also wanted to study the Bible. And it was just a perfect combination, to study the Bible and theology and to study the world and sociology with Tony. So that's how I originally met Tony. He was my sociology professor at Eastern. And then,
did you not know him before going to Eastern?
I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people. I'd heard him preach. I probably had met him in passing. And when I came to Eastern, of course, it makes you feel like you're the most important person in the world, and I ended up studying and really focusing my thesis and everything. And Tony helped me shape all that. He would customize our sociology papers And I had one paper, bro, that was, I had to analyze the problem of homelessness in Philadelphia because I was starting to get involved with that, advocacy for folks on the street. But I had to write the paper as if I were Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. I had to write it as if I were him.
Okay.
So that was my paper. He was notorious for doing stuff like that.
I assume Tony was part of what drew you to Eastern. It isn't like you picked Eastern and, oh, by the way, Tony Campolo happened to be your professor.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. There were a lot of other things that I saw at Eastern that, Tony kind of embodied those. He was really iconic at Eastern. He went to Eastern and then, of course, became a professor. But the idea that our faith should cause us to care about the world, not just escape from the world, that was a big part of it. I mean, he was an evangelist. He loved leading people into a personal relationship with Jesus. I love that too. But a lot of the evangelists I heard were not great. It was just about going to heaven when we die. And Tony loved Jesus. He wanted people to know Jesus. But he also thought that those of us that love Jesus should be powerhouses for justice and love and liberation in this world, not just the next.
Where do you think that came from in Tony? I mean, obviously, it's biblical and it's gospel-centered, but so many other Christians came into faith of his generation and had more of that escapist, dispensational, the world doesn't matter, let's just get out of here. Why didn't Tony have that approach, or what made him latch onto this fuller, more integrated gospel that said this world matters and fixing this world mattered?
Some of it was proximity to people who are impacted. He spent a lot of time in Haiti and tells a lot of stories about how that transformed him. So his relationship with Jesus meant being in relationship with people in poverty and people impacted by injustice. And that fueled a lot of his passion, just as it does mine right now. So, visiting folks that are incarcerated, going with Compassion International. I mean, at one point he was the biggest recruiter for child sponsorship with Compassion. So all that was it was relationally based. It was about showing up, getting, in the spaces where people are suffering. And then you feel really like your theology's messed up if all you've got is God is going to give you streets of gold when you die, just endure whatever you're handed right now. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I can remember Tony saying in class, of course, he liked to stir, especially in class, he liked to stir stuff up. So he'd say, here's the question, would you follow Jesus even if there was no heaven and there was no hell? I know you want to go to heaven, but even if there was no life after death, would you follow Jesus because of how good he is right now? It was a good question,
It's a great question. Speaking of stirring things up, when I first encountered Tony, it was in the 90s. I was probably a college student. Through his writing and through some of his preaching, he had a reputation for being provocative and stirring things up, especially in more complacent evangelical spaces. You mentioned he did that in the classroom too. How did you see him do that? Whether in the classroom or out on the road, speaking places, why did he like to stir it up so much?
It was almost like anywhere people were overly self-confident or pretentious, he would push back. And when you look at Jesus, he did the same thing, but whatever, and it wasn't just a conservative folks. It was also liberal folks. I mean, I can remember even recently at a very progressive gathering, Tony, he did his usual concern about racism and white supremacy and Trump and all that stuff, Christian nationalism. But then he said, in the end, we also have to remember that God's grace is big enough for Donald Trump. If it's not big enough for Trump, it's not big enough for any of us. And that obviously wasn't what people were expecting to hear there, But I can remember, of course, his notorious line, we would show up at these evangelical spaces and say 30,000 kids will starve to death today and no one gives a shit. And you're more upset that I said that in your church than the fact that 30,000 kids will starve to death today. That was a really famous line of Tony's. But there were so many more subtle ways that he did that over and over. I can remember, even personally, we were advocating for homeless families that were living in an abandoned cathedral, and he invited me to speak at this thing with him. And I thought, this is awesome, a great opportunity to recruit, And yet, as soon as I started speaking, he began to interrupt me and play like kind of devil's advocate. He's like, have you talked to the archdiocese? Seems only fair that you would talk directly with them and see, voice your concerns before you. And I'm like, he's like, maybe they have questions about liability. And what if something happens to one of the homeless kids that's living in there and they're responsible? All this stuff. I'm like, yo, man, we're like got a revolution going, So anyway, I loved all that. And it sharpened me. I think it's whenever people would get upset and cancel Tony from a speaking event, he taught me something about that. He was like, you should always invite them to speak with you. And one of the things he taught me was like, every speaking contract that I have has a cancellation fee. So if they cancel you, they have to pay you. But it was also like, whenever people are pushing back against you, invite them to talk with you. And I've done that over and over and over. And usually they're not willing to talk. They just want to talk at you, not with you. But we did the same thing when we were very concerned about Jerry Falwell Jr. at Liberty, and we held an event in Lynchburg. But we invited Jerry Falwell to talk with us, privately or publicly. So that's something I really admired about him. He wasn't, he didn't, punch below the belt, and he didn't talk about people. He always tried to talk with them, even the people he staunchly disagreed with, like Jerry Falwell Sr., right? He wouldn't slander them or anything. It was always a very, he had respect. And, I've told this story a few times, but when Jerry Falwell Sr., died, the news channels came after Tony looking for someone to sort of triumphalistically say, this is one of the leaders of the moral majority. Now they're gone. We're all better off, or something like that. And Tony just grieved, and he said, I don't rejoice in death. And he said, and for all the things that we disagreed about, and he was always clear, there are some very, very important things that we disagreed about. There are a lot of people that came to know Jesus because of Jerry Falwell. And I can at least be thankful for that, and I'm just, so that was just typical Campolo.
He was obviously a contrarian with all sorts of people, including you at times, challenging you. How did he personally deal with the criticism he faced and the pushback? I mean, publicly, as you mentioned, he engaged with his critics. He was gracious at times, but did you ever see him buckle under the pressure of, I'm thinking of, if he had been emerging right now during the social media era, he would have been decimated online for all kinds of things. But how did he handle that criticism when he faced it?
One of the things that he took very seriously was the sort of Matthew 18, talk directly with one another. And so whenever someone would criticize him, he would respond personally. He hand wrote letters, he made phone calls all the time. And he did that, I think, especially for folks that disagreed with him. And I've read some of those letters. Sometimes he would run them by me, and he even wrote a book, Skye, that was called Partly Right. And it was all the critics of Christianity. And he takes them and says, maybe they're partly right. That was where the title came from. And he pulls out some of the very valid critiques that they had, and then he pushes back on some stuff. And I think that was my experience with him. Also, just, in life was when people were critical, he would give them airtime. He would honor them by listening. People were mean. I'm back in the 90s, man. You remember this. People would set up entire websites to try to tear people down. And there were people that made it their life vocation to call, Campolo a heretic. And he actually had a heresy trial at one point. It's just like, man, you got so much time just to tear someone down. And ironically, like his theology and his view of the Bible are as orthodox as the day is long. I mean, there might be some, things on single issues that folks would disagree on, but when it came to the Apostles' Creed and the core tenets of our faith, I mean, the brother was orthodox and he loved Jesus. And so I think it became really hard for folks to, anyone who knew him, it was really hard to hate him.
So you encountered him first as your professor when you were a student. Explain how your relationship with him developed from there and how you became partners in crime in a way, post-college. Where did all that develop?
Well, so his sociology classes were some of the biggest classes at Eastern, a couple hundred people or whatever. But then as you begin to, get into the more specific classes in the later years of undergrad, that's where I really started to, my specialization in my thesis, bro, was Durkheim's idea of totemism. Basically that we make God in our own image. We end up projecting the things that we love about ourselves onto God. And that's what I did my senior thesis on and everything. So Tony loved that. And we were talking about it all the time. But really, where things got like outside of the classroom was when the families in Philadelphia that were living on the streets with their children moved into the cathedral in North Philadelphia and started living there. And that's what started a real powerful student solidarity movement. Tony was massively a part of that. He started coming down, as soon as we got involved in that and we started the simple way out of that. So he and Peggy were probably one of the first people who wrote a check to support us and help us buy the house that I'm in right now. We bought it 25 years ago. We started fixing up abandoned houses. I think he gave us like $20,000 or $30,000 which covered about everything we needed to do that, for our first abandoned house. So he was like there praying with us, but he was also, when he would come down here and hang out with us, he would pray with us, but he would always make sure that our eyes were centered on Jesus. And part of what he loved about this group from Eastern University that started the Simple Way was that we were driven by the early church, the vision in, Acts 2 and 4. And he took us all out to dinner one time and he goes, every once in a while, there's a group of people that it's more than just a sum of its parts. The Spirit does something. And, he would use all his sociology language, sui generis, something arises from the group. And he's like, there's something happening. And, there's all kinds of stories of what happened after that. But he was here for our wedding when Katie and I got married in the abandoned cathedral where the families used to live. So he's just been, a friend for so long. And that was even before we started Red Letter Christians.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to ask you about. Where did the idea or even the phrase Red Letter Christians come from? We know what it means. It's the red letters in the Bible that Jesus spoke, blah, blah, blah. But who originated that phrase and why did you latch onto it and what about it resonated so much with Tony?
We were in a meeting with Tony, Ron Sider, who also passed away, and wrote that tremendous book, Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger, and Jim Wallace, founder of Sojourners, and a handful of these folks that were a much older generation from me. And we're talking about the state of evangelicalism. This is long before Donald Trump. This is about 15 years ago, I guess. And we recall this story that Jim had been interviewed by a DJ, a country music DJ in Tennessee that actually didn't seem to have much to do with faith. He wasn't a religious guy, but he said, I read the Bible, and there's parts of it, if I'm honest, that I love, but there's other parts that I don't love, and I'm actually really confused and troubled by. And he said, but I've always liked the stuff in red. You should call yourselves Red Letter Christians. So ironically, it came from this kind of Tennessee DJ, that was talking with Jim, but that really resonated. We needed new language. We needed a new, and at the end of the day, like Red Letter Christians wasn't about branding anything other than Jesus and the gospel and saying, let's keep Christ and the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes at the center of everything. And that's what Tony and I felt really passionately, and I still do, is that the best corrective to what's gone within evangelicalism is Jesus. If we really came back and said, what if Jesus meant the stuff he said, it changes everything. And that's, I think, one of the best questions that Tony raised for all of us is like, let's live like Jesus meant the stuff he said.
That seems like an antidote to one of the criticisms I often hear, not of Tony or you or your movement, but I've heard a lot of conservative evangelicals say over the years, hey, if you get into this justice stuff, if you start caring about social reform and the poor and all that, if you care about justice, invariably you're going to lose Jesus. And I don't see that from Tony. I don't see that from you. I don't see that from what you guys have done. So where does that critique come from, that if you go down the justice road, you're going to lose Jesus? And why did that not prove to be true with Tony Campolo?
Well, you do start to ask which Jesus, right? Because the Jesus that we see in the gospel, I mean, the very beginning of the Gospel of Luke is the mighty will come down from their thrones, the lowly will be lifted up, the hungry will be filled, the rich will be sent around away empty. And Tony used to say, that's not Karl Marx. that's the Gospel of Luke. That's the Song of Mary. Jesus' inaugural address when he talks about his ministry, setting the oppressed free. And of course, Matthew 25, which Tony said so many times, in the end, we'll all be gathered before God, and God's not going to ask us doctrinal questions. It's not going to be virgin birth, agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. But we're going to be asked, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was sick, did you take care of me? Did you visit me in prison? Did you welcome me when I was a stranger, an immigrant, a person in need of care? So that, I don't know exactly where. I mean, I can tell you, I think historically, what happens is we see the places that Christianity has been imbalanced, and we end up often exaggerating the parts that we have forgotten. And so I always say, it's kind of like if you run off the right side of the road, you yank the wheel, and you run off the left side of the road. And what Tony did so well, I think, is say, let's get an equilibrium here. These things have to go together, right? Like faith and works, the Great Commandment, the Great Commission, like loving God, loving people, they're inseparable. They're like sides of a coin, or, we used to say they're blades of scissors. They have to operate together. How can we say that we love God and not love our neighbor, as Scripture itself says, And so that, but I think that's how we get a social gospel and an evangelical gospel. And we separate things like personal salvation and social transformation. And that's the thing that makes Tony so difficult, I think, to really, if one's authentic, like he believed in a personal relationship to Jesus. Almost every time I preached with him and heard him preach, and it was hundreds of times, he would invite people into a personal relationship with Jesus, even if we were in a Southern Baptist church on Sunday morning.
Not a bad idea. I don't know how many books Tony wrote over the years, but are there ones or a few that stand out to you as like the ones that epitomize Tony Campolo, the books that you would, for someone listening to this who's like, I heard of the guy, maybe the name popped up, but younger person who didn't know his ministry super well, where would you direct them to be like, you got to read this? This is the quintessential Tony Campolo book. What is it?
Bro, this is so hard. Yeah, I mean, I think he was looking at like nearly 40 books or something.
Yeah.
I don't, but I mean, I'm not like a self-promoter, but I was, honored to do one of the later books together, which was Red Letter Revolution. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because it was a conversation, and we talk about everything from Israel and Palestine to sexuality to politics and theology. How do you read the Bible? What about these parts that seem violent? All that stuff. So I love that we were able to just run the gambit. We actually did it as a conversation, and then Peggy helped us get it into some kind of semblance of order. And but it was such a gift. Bono and Jimmy Carter and all kinds of folks have read it and endorsed it. So Red Letter Revolution was a holy project, and even more so now. As far as Tony's, he wrote a book that's going to come out next February, I believe. So it's a memoir, and I can't even remember the name of it. I've got it over at my house, but he was in the stages of writing that. We were actually planning his 90th birthday. So, that's coming out in a few months still, even though he didn't, make it long enough here to see it released. Some of his really great stuff are like these little things. He wrote a book about, I really like the Partly Right book that I mentioned. He wrote a book, 20 hot potatoes Christians are afraid to touch. It kind of goes through all the hot button issues that we often don't want to talk about. And he's real nuanced in how he thinks about a lot of those. He wrote a little book on Barabbas. That's pretty awesome. It's makes a case for nonviolence, and Carpe Diem. That was his big storybook. Carpe Diem, from it's like what was that? Dead Poet Society. Totally.
Did he write that before or after Dead Poet Society?
That's like a classic, just good Campolo stories and stuff, man. And I'm so glad to see some of the viral little videos. Some of them probably ripped out of VHS tapes that are going out there, because he's an amazing preacher and storyteller. So yeah, man.
Well, he was a brilliant communicator, and he had this quality that I find incredibly admirable, which is just a fearlessness. Fearlessness to tackle the stuff that other people didn't want to tackle, to challenge communities that others would be like, just don't rock the boat. And I don't know if that was a innate part of his personality, or if it was the security he had as a professor, where he had kind of this base to operate from and didn't necessarily worry about how the broader world thought of him. But he had a fearlessness that seems also too rare today among Christian leaders and Christian voices, that really appreciate. Without betraying any trust, obviously, you were very close to him. Are there things about the private Tony that would surprise those of us who only really knew him as the public Tony? Are there things about your friendship or what you saw in him personally that the rest of us might be intrigued to discover about this guy that we didn't see when he was on a stage?
There were things in the later part of his life, like these last few years. I think he wrestled, as a lot of, I think, older white men that are at least aware of social location and, power structures and systemic racism and stuff. He really wrestled with where to find himself. I think what his role was. He wanted to do more, and yet he wanted to make space for new people. And I can remember in one gathering, it was very frustrating to him because there was this real generational disconnect. It was just like you had his generation and a bunch of young folks that were really solid, like love Jesus, care about justice, but it was like we were speaking different languages. And I was somewhere in between. I was one of the bridge builders. But I can remember Tony saying, I feel like the best thing I can do is just die and get out of the way.
Wow.
So that this I had a tear, I think, that started rolling down my face. And I was like, you shouldn't feel like there's so many folks that are fully aware that you have paved the way to some of the conversations and change that we see happening. But I think that, when you realize that, even once again in this election, that there's a real old wineskin of white evangelicalism that's so hard to crack. And he spent his life doing that. And yet there's all kinds of other beautiful stuff happening outside of that. You start to go, how much time do we spend reacting to these toxic versions of Christianity? And how much time do we spend trying to build something new? And I think that was one of the and there were all kinds of little iterations of that, bro. Like just a few years ago, the guy that started the Creation Fest, which I know a lot of listeners won't know what that is, but thousands and thousands of folks that would listen to Christian musicians, and they would give an invitation. Tony spoke there many times. He was a regular there. So a lot of people kind of began their faith journey there, their relationship with Jesus there. The dude that started that was convicted of sexual abuse and ended up in jail. And this is one of those things where this wasn't just like the Southern Baptist Church or something or Hillsong. Like this was like a peer of Tony's who he knew. And I just remember him, like, it gutted him, and I think all the repercussions of that too. It was about this guy and the people he hurt, but it was bigger than that, So I think those things were immensely hard. And of course, what's happening in Gaza, and also, anti-Semitism and all these different things that you feel like, man, he's been doing this for decades. And sometimes it can feel like we haven't made much progress. But so anyway, yeah.
Yeah, there's always new problems that emerge, almost like a hydra. You cut off one and more pop out. What did Tony like privately? I mean, you mentioned some of his struggles late in life and feeling the gap between himself and a younger generation. Were there weird things about him that were just only a friend would know that he loved to do, or things that drove him crazy that when you were on the road with him and did stuff? Were there little nuances of his personality that you found endearing?
He talked to everyone, and it would we traveled all over the UK together on a tour, and everywhere we went, he would make friends, and was
he is the raging extrovert that he appears to be on stage.
Oh my gosh, it's just unbelievable. Yeah. And so, you would always be somewhere like, well, where's Tony? Always talking to the folks that are making the meal out back or something, and so everything took longer because he would start conversations. And there was one time where a friend of mine was just telling me this story where they were in a restaurant and this woman was having a little birthday party, but there were only a couple people with her, and they didn't make a big deal out of it. They kind of sang happy birthday and no one noticed. So Tony just stands up in the entire restaurant and goes, "Hey, our friend just turned 70 years old over here, and we need to show her some love." So then the whole restaurant starts singing happy birthday. So, that probably happened every day in Tony's life, some version of that,
Yeah, well, he had a proclivity for birthday parties and restaurants. So we know that. Well, Shane, as we wrap up, I know you're grieving the loss of your friend, and it's appropriate that it's Thanksgiving, and we're also grateful for those who've gone before us and have been fathers and mothers to us in the faith. Any final thoughts on Tony's legacy and what you're carrying from it, or what you think the church in the U.S. or even globally is indebted to him for?
Yeah. I think when I think of one of the things that he taught me consistently was related to what you're saying. It's to not live wishing we had been more courageous. And he actually stated, he kind of cited this study of old folks that in their later, they're 80, 90 years old, and they were asked, what would you do differently in your life? The number one answer, or one of the top answers, was I would take more risks. And so thankfully, I don't think Tony has to wish that he had taken more risks. One of the things that he would say is, and he would do it in class, he would go, "Do not tiptoe through life just to arrive at death safely." All around you, people are going to be tiptoeing through this life just so they can safely arrive at death. And he said, do something daring with your life. Don't look back and think, man, I should have taken more risks or been more courageous. And so, that's one of the things that I think, it shaped me. It's why I've done some of the things that I've done, but I also look at the heroes of our faith that have gone before us, and I'm grateful that they didn't tiptoe through life just to arrive at death safely. So, yeah, we celebrate our brother, and to be honest, man, 90 years old, an amazing life, 2 strokes. Like we've kind of thought about what it would look like to see him pass over to the other side. We were planning his 90th birthday, in February. I just told my friend he'll be joining us remotely for that, but we're still going to celebrate him. And I'm so grateful for not just the legacy of Tony Campolo, but the way that he pointed people to Jesus and all of the folks that he was able to show the love of God, the justice of God, the liberation of God to. And I'm one of them. My wife's one of them too.
Amen. Well, we've all benefited from Tony, you more closely, but even at a distance, his wisdom and his writing, his speaking, his life was a model, and we're grateful for it. Thank you for taking the time to share a little bit with us of your time with him. We appreciate it. And I hope you have a great Thanksgiving.
Yeah, thanks, bro. You too. Talk to you soon.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much, much more.